are worth telling. And some stories fall in the category of must be told. And I want to tell you the story of 2 billion lives saved. The story begins in Cresco, Iowa, actually. In 1914, a boy named Norman Borlaug was born. And one day he would be hired to hybridize wheat and corn for arid climates, which would save more than 2 billion lives. Now, of course, he didn't do this alone. There were other players in the story, like Henry Wallace, who happened to be the vice president under Roosevelt, who hired Borlaug to run the program that he established in order to create these strains of hybrid corn and wheat. Or maybe it began with George Washington Carver. He was a student at Iowa State when Henry Wallace's father was a professor there. And Carver took an interest in young Wallace and taught him a love for plants. Or perhaps it was Moses and Susan. Moses and Susan were farmers in Diamond, Missouri. And Quantrill's raiders, who terrorized anyone who didn't believe in slavery, rode through their farm and dragged off a woman named Mary Washington and her infant son. And Mary and Susan were best friends, and when this happened, Susan was so distraught that Moses arranged for a meeting with the raiders. And after riding many miles into Kansas, Moses traded his last horse for a tiny burlap bag, and inside that burlap bag was an infant George Washington, and out of that bag he took him and he placed him inside his shirt to keep him warm. And that boy became known as George Washington Carver. So who deserves the credit for 2 billion lives? Is it Norman Borlaug? Is it Henry Wallace? Is it George Washington Carver? Is it Moses Carver? Is it Susan? That's the question that Andy Andrews asked in his book, The Butterfly Effect. And that's the question I pose to you. Who is really responsible for this? Well, they all are. And even the smallest player in the story has a part in this legendary outcome. Today we're going to encounter one of those kinds of stories. When you hear it, you'll know the outcome. You'll know the major player. But Jesus points out a minor player with a major impact. Today we will hear her story. Let's worship. Would you please stand with me and join in